Hey guys, it is Monday, and that means it's time for another Interim Monday show. Um, I've covered bourbon, rye whiskey, the Bottom Bond Act, and corn whiskey. So, why not talk about Scotch? Now, it's gonna have to go quick because there's a lot to unpack here because it's not as simple as everybody thinks. So, to start, there are different types of Scotch whiskey. You have single malt Scotch, like this hardbag. You have blended Scotch, like this Shackleton, which is actually blended malt Scotch. You also have single grain Scotch and blended. So, already tripping over things. Single malt, single grain, blended malt, blended Scotch. So, let's start with the definition of whiskey in Scotland. To be considered whiskey at all, it has to be aged 3 years. And there are more complicated things, but like I said, I'm going quick and glossing over stuff. So, single malt doesn't mean that it's like a single barrel or anything like that. It's malt from a single distillery. Malt in this case being malted barley. There are multiple regions where whiskey is produced in Scotland, and they each have sort of a distinctive style. There are outliers, but mostly per region they have a style. For example, you have the islands, Orkney, Jura, Isle of Mull, the Isle of Skye, and they tend to be slightly salty / briny with a little bit of peat smoke and really rich. And you've got Lowland, which tends to be a softer, sweeter, gentler whiskey, and they tend to be not quite so meaty and full-bodied as the island whiskies. You have Highland whiskey, like Aberlour, which is sort of the happy medium between the lowland and the island. So sometimes it has a little bit of salt in it, not always. It's generally a little more robust, but with a malty cereal character. And then you have Speyside whiskey. Come on. Like Glenlivet, which tends to be more floral and sweet, honeyed. And then you have Campbellton, which is really heavy smoke and medicinal notes. And I don't have any, unfortunately. I should do something about that. And then you have Islay, one of my favorites. Well known for being one of the sources of the smokiest, peatiest, briniest, most potently flavored, well-known whiskeys, like Ardbeg, Lefroy, Lagavulin, Bowmore, Kilchoman, Bruichladdich, Port Charlotte, so on. They each have a distinct character. Then you've got, say, blended malts. Now, blended malts are all made from malted barley, but not from a single distillery. So, say a Diageo brand wants to make a blended malt whiskey. They would pull malt whiskey from the distilleries that are owned by Diageo. I can't think of who who is owned by Diageo at this point. That doesn't have... Talisker. Yep, Talisker is Diageo. So they could pull from Talisker to get some peppery, briny, slightly peaty whiskey, and then pull from I really should have planned this better. Anyway, pull from other distilleries that they own. I think they own Cool Isla, and blend them together to make to match a flavor profile that they want, like just a hint of brine and pepper and smoke, and some malty honey character, and maybe a little bit of floral notes to sort of offset the sharp brine and peat. And blended whiskey, or blended malt whiskey, needs to be 100% malted barley. Not necessarily from the same distillery. In fact, by definition, not from the same distillery. Has to be at least 3 years old. And it's generally blended for mass market appeal to create a flavor that's a good, appealing, approachable whiskey, like the Johnny Walker whiskeys or Chivas, or that Shackleton, and blended Scotch without the malt word in there is the same, except it also includes grain whiskey. Now, here's where things get sticky. Grain whiskey is whiskey made in Scotland that is made from grains other than malted barley, or it is made in a column still and not a pot still. So it's generally, they use wheat and rye, but most of what they grow and distill is barley. So the real difference there is that it's made with a column still. Now, a column still allows you to get a more consistent, higher proof, not really a higher proof, but a purer spirit. See, in a pot still, you've essentially got a pot and that has a top and then like a little stem that goes up like that, and it has a tendency to carry up all the interesting oils that give you a good, strong, robust character. Like whiskeys that sit and linger in your mouth, that coat the inside of your mouth with sort of a slightly oily feeling. That's what the pot still provides. Column stills tend to leave all that behind, and you get a purer representation of the grain in your new make spirit. So I've just sort of handled single grain, grain whiskey in Scotland as part of my blended Scotch description. Blended Scotch, of course, has to be at least 3 years old. It's a blend of malt whiskeys and grain whiskeys to create a approachable, friendly profile. Single grain is like single malt. It's from a single distillery, not necessarily a single barrel. However, it is possible to get single barrel whiskey or single barrel Scotch. For example, I have a bottle of Blair Athol 21-year-old, which is from a single sherry hogshead, which is really good. Let's see. I will go more in depth if there is interest in this, but I likely won't, because that Scotch is complicated. The rules regarding Scotch are a little bit complex. For example, did you know that you can bottle blended Scotch outside of the UK and still call it Scotch? It's how a passport is made. It's blended in Scotland, shipped to the U.S., and bottled. But single malt Scotch, to be called Scotch, must be distilled, aged, and bottled in Scotland. It's why there are interesting things like when Costco has their 12-year-old single malt Scotch whiskey, they've bought casks from someone, blended all these single malt casks together from a single distillery, because a single malt doesn't mean it's one barrel. It means it's all from one distillery. And there's been some speculation that this one distillery that Costco sells is Macallan, but we don't know. But anyway, and they have it bottled and labeled in Scotland and then shipped to the U.S. What difference does this make? Well, honestly, I don't know. I think it's a regulatory thing. It also means that you're paying a tax when you bottle it, I think. Because I've read through some barrel selection program materials from from distilleries like Altamore and no, it wasn't Altamore. I can't remember who it was, but from somebody. Anyway, basically, when you buy the cask from the distillery, you pay for the cask and you pay a value-added tax on top of it. And then when you bottle it, you also have to pay a tax on it based on the proof that it's going in the bottle, which is why a lot of Scotch whiskies are available at 80 proof and not really any higher, although that's changing. So essentially, the higher the proof, the higher the tax. So say you're bottling at cask strength, which comes out to 66%. You're paying more than if you watered it down to 40%. Something to consider. Anyway, I've rambled on long enough. This is already longer than I wanted it to be. So, happy Monday, and I will see you on Wednesday.